Hello dear students, I am Atikur Rahman. I am a faculty at the Department of Geography, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today we are going to understand and see a very important topic and which is a base, and the title of this today's discussion and lecture is Photogeology, Visual Interpretation of Aerial Photographs. In this module and in this lecture we try to understand different learning objectives. For example, what are aerial photographs, how it is different from satellite data, what are different types of aerial photographs, on what basis, major basis we can classify aerial photographs, what are its characteristics, and then we try to see what are different visual interpretation techniques on which we can classify aerial photographs, and some case examples. So friends, we are started today with understanding on a subject and topic which is very important, as I said before, photogeology. If I start this topic, we can say there are two terms, photo and geology. Photo, it means not the photo what we have our own photo, but is a photo of earth surface feature, and geology means the study of geology based on the aerial photographs. That is, the aerial photograph is nothing but is a kind of satellite data. So what do we have? That the starting point of remote sensing was the aerial photography. So let us understand first what is aerial photograph. So aerial photograph is nothing but is a photograph that has been acquired by using a specific camera that we call as an aerial camera, which are placed with an aircraft or placed on any taller building, and we take the picture of any part of surface of the earth. So what we have, aerial photography comes into picture. You must have understood aerial photography or the science of aerial photography or photogrammetry in another module, but today we are going to see how these aerial photographs are being used and what are the different techniques, visual techniques that can be used for geological studies. Therefore, we call it a photogeology. So let us understand what are different types of aerial photograph. After studying, after knowing what are the aerial photographs, as I said, the aerial photographs are the photographs which has been captured by using an aircraft, a balloon or any other object or from the taller building for any natural feature which is there on a particular part of surface of the earth, which is the area of interest for any specific purpose and project. So let us see what are different aerial photographs. On what basis we can classify aerial photograph? So on the major basis, there are three bases on which we can classify aerial photograph. Let us see the first. We classify the aerial photograph on the basis of axis. The moment I say axis, that means the camera axis. Second is the scale. If I say the scale, that means the scale of aerial photograph. I will also explain what is the scale and what is the axis. And the third, the most important, is the film that is being used in order to capture the aerial photographs. So what we have, let us see one by one. The moment I say scale, so what we have, suppose this is an aerial camera, and if you are taking the photograph of any particular part of surface of the earth, so what do we have? This, the vertical line is called the axis. Axis, that means the camera axis. So what do we have? We keep axis perpendicular to the surface of the earth. So what we have, in spite of having due care, when the camera is fitted in an aircraft or in a balloon, and if it is being taken, photograph is being taken, the camera get tilted little bit. So on the basis of axis, we can classify the aerial photograph into three categories. So on the basis of axis, we can classify number one, vertical aerial photograph, AP aerial photograph. Number 2, oblique aerial photograph, that we call is a low oblique photograph, and the third is high oblique photograph, high oblique aerial photograph. So, that means if the camera axis is perpendicular to the surface of the earth, so we call it a vertical aerial photograph, but in spite of all due care, the camera axis get tilted little bit right or left. So, therefore, if the camera axis tilt is, say for example like this, plus minus 1 to 3 degree, we can classify that aerial photograph into vertical aerial photograph. So, we cannot have a true vertical photograph, vertical aerial photograph. If we have a camera axis tilted 1 to 3 degree, then we can classify as a vertical aerial photograph. If the camera axis tilt is somewhere from 3 to 15 degree, then we can call it a low oblique aerial photograph. And if the camera axis tilt is more than 15 degree, then we can say high oblique photograph. Then there are other different types of aerial photograph, but these are the 3 major classes of aerial photograph that is being acquired by using the aerial camera, and that can be classified on the basis of axis. Now, let us see the second one, the scale, which is very important. Scale, based on the scale we can classify aerial photograph again into 3 categories. One is large scale aerial photograph, number 2 medium scale aerial photograph, and number 3 small scale aerial photograph. Now, you must have also studied the scale in cartographic modules. Let me try to understand little bit about the scale. If I say scale, scale is nothing but is a proportion of distance on the aerial photograph and on the ground. If I say 1:100, that means 1 centimeter on the aerial photograph represent 100 centimeter distance on the ground. Now, if I say large scale photograph, that means if scale is, say for example 1:15,000, so that we call is a large scale aerial photograph. If the scale is somewhere, if it is more than this, somewhere 15,000 to 30,000 is a medium scale photograph. If the scale is more than 30,000, then we call it a small scale aerial photograph. Sorry, this is less than 15,000. So, what do we understand from this? If you acquire any aerial photograph, if aerial photograph, what we acquire is in different format, that is in format of 17 centimeter by 17 centimeter, 21 centimeter by 21 centimeter. So, if we have a scale of aerial photograph which is large, that means less than 15,000. So, that means the area represented on a photograph will be small, but the details will be much better. That means you can see each and every human and natural features much in detail. But if scale is small, that means more than 30,000, 1:30,000. So, that means area covered by one aerial photograph will be large, but the details will be less. You cannot segregate smaller and finer details. So, on the basis of scale, we can classify aerial photograph into 3 categories. Now, third, that is a film. Again, on the basis of film, we can classify aerial photograph into 3 categories. Number 1, which is a very old one, black and white aerial photograph, that we call is a panchromatic photograph or panchromatic satellite data. Second we call is a colored aerial photograph, AP designates aerial photograph, and the third is the infrared aerial photograph. So that means based on the film which we use in the aerial photograph, we can classify aerial photograph into number 1 black and white aerial photograph, second is color aerial photograph. These two you understand easily and better. But infrared photograph, let me tell you, it is the photograph which is being taken in the infrared region of electromagnetic spectrum, for which you must have studied in the remote sensing satellite data. So what we have seen by now, the aerial photographs and what are different types of aerial photographs. In that we have taken the axis. So if you want to study a ground terrain which is hilly for geological studies, because topic was photogeology. So for photogeology, if you want to study the hilly areas, if you want to study the landform, if you want to study the valley and mountains, then you need to have a photograph maybe captured in the high oblique or low oblique. But if you want to study the area which is flat, if you want to study a flat terrain, then for that you need to have a photograph which can be taken into vertical or low oblique photograph. So this is the utility and this is the use of scale of aerial photograph, axis of aerial photograph. The second is, as I said, the scale. So therefore what I can say is that if you want to study the large area, maybe a state or regional level, then you need to have an aerial photograph which is being captured at a scale more than 1:30,000. Why? Because it can cover a big area in one aerial photograph. And if you want to study medium size areas and all, then you need to have a medium size scale 1:15,000 to 30,000. And if you want to study the micro units, smaller units in detail, whether soil, forest type or rocks or minerals, for that what you need to have? You need to have a aerial photograph that can be taken at a scale of less than 15,000. So you can ask that if these are the only 3 size of aerial photograph we can have on these 3 scales, the answer is no. You can have aerial photograph as per your own scale. If you want to have an area that can be captured at a scale of 2000 or 4000, maybe 4000 for terrestrial mapping, you can have at the 4000 scale. So you can have aerial photograph as at your own desired scale. For that you need to have agencies, you need to tell the agency when you put a indent to acquire the aerial photograph. So you can have a aerial photograph at n number of scales, 1:10,000, 5,000, 6,000, 6,500 and so like that. So the basic objective of telling the classifying aerial photograph on the basis of scale is that at what scale you want to have, that depend upon it precisely on the purpose and the need. And the third, what I said, the black and white photograph and color infrared and colored photograph. If you want to have a better separability and interpretability of any object, then you need to have a colored photograph or infrared photograph. Why infrared photograph? Because you must have studied in remote sensing that there are certain features which do not behave better or well in the visible region. So in the infrared region, say for example vegetation or some rocks and minerals, they behave better in infrared region. So what I can say that now let us see what is the advantages and disadvantages of aerial photograph compared to satellite images. Now what we can say that it was starting point of remote sensing, that is acquiring of aerial photograph by balloon, pigeon and all. So that was starting point. Today what we are having, we are having a aerial photograph of at a scale of 1:4000, 5000. In earlier time we do not had that good quality of aerial photograph in terms of spatial resolution or scale. So the aerial photograph was of immense use, but now what we are having satellite data which is as good as aerial photograph, which is acquired, which is being captured at 1:2000 or 4000 scale. Say for example, satellite data of Iconos, QuickBird and so and so. So, but still the importance of aerial photograph is immense. So, now let us understand the second part or second half of the today's discussion is the visual interpretation. So, if I say visual interpretation, what we have here is visual interpretation. When I say visual interpretation, there are another term, that is digital image interpretation. Image interpretation. So, as its name says that visual interpretation, what we do visually by own eyes and hand, whereas digital image interpretation precisely means we apply our mind, brain and the computer software and technology. But our topic of discussion today is visual interpretation. That means, in a simple word, says how best we can classify, identify, interpret, separate a feature visually by our own eyes using the pen and pencil. So, for that, within the visual image interpretation, what we have, there are different techniques, there are different elements, there are different keys of visual image interpretation, and there are about 8 and 9 image interpretation keys and elements. Based on all these image interpretation keys and elements, we can separate, we can identify easily different object, different feature. So, let us understand what are these image interpretation keys and elements, each one in detail. The first and the most important is shape. Shape means what is the shape of a particular object, whether it is a circular, whether it is a rectangular or whether it is a linear. Say for example, if it is a road, then it could be linear. If it is a straight, that means it is a road, but if it is a linear but like this, then we can say that it could be a river. So, based on the shape, we can identify, we can separate different objects differently. So, within the linear, we can separate road and river very easily, right. So, this is one image interpretation element. I do have some of the photographs of some particular part of surface of the earth that also explain the shape, okay. But this is also better. Say another example, if we have a ground object like this, so what we can say that it, and within this if we have the green area, what we can say that is a playground. Now, the circular playground is mainly of cricket field, but if you have rectangular playground, then it could be hockey ground or a football ground. So, based on the shape, we can identify, interpret different objects differently. Now, second most important is size. How big a particular object is, whether small, large or very large. Say for example, if I say size, if it is small, so what we can say is that, it could be a residential unit. Say for example, if it is like this, it could be a residential, smaller, unit. But if it is like this, bigger in size like this, so what we can say that it could be commercial or residential or any other. So, based on the size, we can separate, identify different object differently. The third is pattern. All these I will show you in different diagrams which are there in the module. What pattern is there? Whether it is a regular or irregular. Okay. If you have a trees which are planted in a regular way, so what we can say that is a planned plantation. But if it is naturally growing, that will be haphazard. So, that will be irregular. So, pattern is another very important object. We can say that is a helps in identifying visually a particular object and feature. Third is the shadow. Shadow plays important role in identifying, interpreting a different object. How? I tell you, it helps in identifying a taller buildings, mountains and the valleys, plateaus and so and so. So, if you have a taller mountain like this, if the sunlight is coming from this side, what will happen? It will put a shadow here on this side. So, you can calculate the shadow and get the height of this mountain terrain. If you have a tall tower and the sun is from this side, so what will happen? You can see the shadow here and you can get the length of the building or the height of the building, height of the building by a simple calculation. So, shadow helps in identifying a particular object or feature. At the same time, shadow also put obstruction, because there are certain features which are here and that will be lying in the shadow. So, you cannot identify, you cannot see these objects which are there. So, if you use the high oblique photographs, so you can identify the height and all. So, this is another important feature, shadow. Then we have the next is the tone. The moment I say tone, if you use, I said, the black and white aerial photograph, if the tone is light, dark, so based on that, if you have a, say for example, granite, it will have a different tone. If you have a mica, it will have a different tone. If you have, say for example, sandstone, it will have a different tone. Okay. So, from light to very dark, it will have different tones. Similarly, if you have water bodies, it will have a dark tone, right. So, tone also helps in identifying various geological geomorphologic features. If you have a river will give you a dark tone, and if it is a river bed or if you have a floodplain, it will have a lighter tone, because on those floodplains, river beds, there are sand silts deposition. So, tone also is very important visual interpretation key. 6 is texture. Now, the moment I say texture, it designates how smooth surface is. If the surface is rough or surface is smooth. So, texture try to separate different features, different object on the basis of surface roughness. What does it mean? If you have sand, desert area, the texture will be rough. If you have floodplain, if you have alluvial soils, there you have a texture will be smooth. Similarly, if you have a crop, high crops like sugarcane, the surface will be rough. Okay. If there is grasses, the surface will be smooth. So, texture is also very important in identifying and separating one feature from the other. Now, another is association. The moment I say association, that means a particular object is associated with any other particular object. How? Say for example, if I say alluvial soil, so I cannot say alluvial soil in a desert area, because alluvial soil are formed in the floodplain. So, association is very important. The association of alluvial soil is with the rivers. The association of desert sandy soil is with the desert. So, association is also very important. Say for example, in urban areas, if you have a railway track and some different tracks, so we can say, and a shed, we can say this is a railway yard or railway station. So, association helps in identifying a particular object. Say for example, if there is a road, as I said here, and there is a big building like this. So, what does it mean? And they are somewhere else outside the city. So, what we can say? These are the industrial areas, industrial establishment. Now, last is the location. So, location means where it is located. Any feature which is located inside the city or outside the city, number one, if it is urban area, if you are trying to understand the natural conditions in a desert area, in the mountainous area, in the valleys, where a particular object is located. So, location is also very important, plays an important role in identifying, separating a particular object or feature, right. So, based on all these 7-8 elements, we visually identify, interpret by using aerial photograph of any kind of aerial photograph, whether it is a colored photograph, black and white, or low oblique, high oblique, or anything. Now, you may be wondering that do we need to take all the elements to identify, interpret any particular object or feature? I say no. Sometime maybe based on the shape only you can identify a particular object, maybe sometime based on the shape and size you can identify, interpret a particular object, maybe sometime this or this or this may help you identifying, interpreting a particular object, or maybe these 2 or 3 will be able to identify, interpret particular object. So, in order to identify, interpret visually by using aerial photograph, you may need 1, 2, a couple of any of these 8 or 9 elements you can use for identifying, interpreting a particular object in a geological studies or any other studies. So, my dear students, by now you must be aware, you must have got what are aerial photographs, what are the basis of classifying aerial photographs, and what are its characteristics, and what are the various techniques on which we can interpret aerial photographs in order to identify, separate or different objects or features, which is human or the natural features. These are the only 2 features which are there on the surface of the earth, on any part of the world. You must also be aware by now that what is the advantage of visual interpretation compared to digital interpretation techniques, and how we can use these aerial photographs in photogeology or geological studies. So, this was the main motive of today's lecture, to understand the aerial photographs, its characteristics and its uses, and different visual interpretation techniques. In a separate lecture or module, you must be trying to understand digital image interpretation techniques, which is better compared to the visual image interpretation or interpretation technique. So, I thank you all for patience and understanding. Thank you all.